So our perspectives of the civil rights movement and of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. have changed over time. Things do change, but we still have a long way to go. Viola Liuzzo didn't quite make it to her 40th birthday. She was shot by the KKK on March 25, 1965, while driving fellow marchers between Selma and Montgomery, Alabama, after the infamous march. I had recently turned 12 years old when I heard the news of her death, and the news mentioned that she was a Unitarian. We didn't have Unitarian Universalists, or just barely by then, but she was a Unitarian. This is what stuck with me because I'd been attending a Unitarian fellowship in West Lafayette, Indiana, and a fellow Unitarian had been killed for defending civil rights. It wasn't like hearing the news of JFK being gunned down. It was different. Viola Liuzzo seemed more real. She was a mom, like the Unitarian moms who taught our Sunday school church across the street classes, like my mom, who I saw as a change maker, a speaker-upper on women's issues and poverty and race. She was real. But then I began to hear, and even among some Unitarian parents, that maybe Viola Liuzzo had been irresponsible at best and an idiot at worst. She should have been more worried about her kids and her husband. She should have known that going to Selma was dangerous, and now her kids had no mom. Then rumors spread about why Liuzzo had gone to the march, horrible racist rumors about white women and black men. It turned out that the Klansman who had shot her was an FBI informant. Later, it was found by a study of FBI archives that the horrible racist rumors about her were started and spread by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover just to divert attention from the FBI's involvement in the whole tragedy. Perspectives change over time. Racism is still an overwhelming issue, but progress has been made. Now it seems Viola Liuzzo is a UU hero. UU ministers give sermons about her as they do about a lot of the heroes that we claim. Things change, but we still have a long way to go. Bayard Rustin was the organizer of organizers. He was behind-the-scenes leader of the civil rights movement. Bayard Rustin was a friend of Dr. King's, and he had a reputation for getting things done, even if he may have broken some rules or gone against power to do it. Bayard Rustin and his team of activists, a lot of them college kids, were much responsible for the March on Washington, where King gave his I Had a Dream speech. As much as anyone, they made it happen. Bayard Rustin was gay, and he hid the fact, less than many gay men, especially gay black men at the time. His homosexuality was a big issue for a lot of the leaders of the movement. For a lot of them, not just because it attracted negative publicity, but for a lot of them, because they had religious or simply anti-gay bias. Somehow, and perhaps with a little affirmation from Dr. King and some others, Rustin fought through the negative publicity and the hate and organized one of the most successful protests in the history of the United States. But at the time, he never got his due. Perspectives change over time. Today, there's a much acclaimed Hollywood biopic about Bayard Rustin. It's just called Rustin, and if you haven't seen it, you should. It's about a civil rights movement that didn't take much into account the civil rights of a gay black man. Rustin was an unsung hero in his time whose praise is sung today. Things change, but we still have a long way to go. Anna Arnold Hedgeman of the National Council of Churches served as the lone woman on the administrative council of the March on Washington. She knew, as we all do, that many women were stalwarts of the movement, that the movement couldn't have done without them. When the list of speakers for the day of the march was announced, she was aghast that no women were on the list to speak. Anna Hedgeman pushed the male-dominated leadership who fought her tooth and nail. This fight almost fractured the movement, or at least the organization for the march. Finally, the male organizers saw that without women, without the women of the movement, and especially with the women of the movement speaking in public against them, this issue would make them look like fools, and the march might not be successful. With the pressure from Anna Hedgeman and her ever bigger group of allies, the men finally included a woman speaker. Perspectives change over time. Today, it would probably seem weird and politically stupid, even to the still male-dominated organizations we deal with, not to include female voices. Things change, but we still have a long way to go. As a worship associate of this church and at other UU churches I have attended, I've participated in a long series of MLK Day services, even before there was officially an MLK Day. I used to read parts of the letter from Birmingham jail out loud, maybe a bit over dramatically. The last time I participated here in this pulpit, our minister at the time, Jamie, played videos of King and other movement heroes reading the parts of the letter instead of us doing it. It had thankfully become a bit uncomfortable for white men to dramatically read these words. I don't always agree with UU definitions of cultural appropriation, but dramatically reading Dr. King in front of the congregation was just that. After all, any UU who has sat through a King Day service knows that it was the words of so-called liberal white preachers which prompted Dr. King to write his famous letter. Perspectives change over time. We still have a long way to go, but things will change if we make them change. And now we're going to watch a video. This video gives a perspective that seems useful on this day as we get ready to celebrate Dr. King's Day tomorrow.
When you were coming to Birmingham in 1963, you were coming to Ku Klux Klan country. Birmingham had more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches than any other city in the nation. The Ku Klux Klan and racial segregationists were not about to let some Negro preacher from Atlanta or some group of demonstrators either in Birmingham or outside the state to come and change their way of life. This is our place, this is our power. You know, how dare you come in and want to share our power with us?
It was some very dark days in Birmingham, Alabama.
But I was scared to death. In Birmingham then, the police was the black person's biggest fear.
You couldn't eat where you wanted to eat. You couldn't go where you wanted to go. They had intimidated the working black people. And Dr. King knew that. The movement was stagnated. It was dead.
But I'm going to say to you, wait a minute, Birmingham. Somebody's got to have some sense in Birmingham.
Dr. Martin Luther King was invited to come to Birmingham to help with this situation.
As difficult as it is, we must meet hate with love.
We would always meet at 16th Street Baptist Church. That was the meeting place for Dr. King.
I'm on my way.
It was always fiery meetings with a lot of good singing, a lot of good praying.
I'm on my way. I'm on my way. To freedom land.
Dr. King was arrested on Good Friday, April 12th, 1963. He was jailed for parading without a permit. So Dr. King's in jail, and I don't know how many, but a substantial number of people, young people particularly, in jail. When I say young people, I'm talking about kids 14 to 18. There may have been some younger, but 14 to 18. And being in jail overnight is one thing, but being in jail more than 1 or 2 nights became a major issue. I think the first time I visited him may have been that Saturday. As I approached the jail, I had the burdensome moniker of being identified as, quote, Dr. King's New York lawyer. So the parents, as I went in to see Dr. King, they were shouting at me, Attorney Jones, get our kids out of jail. Tell Dr. King if you're visiting, we gotta get our kids out of jail. And the reason they were upset was that we didn't have the money, sufficient money to bail at that time. At the end of the day, they would say, well, Dr. King, he led this demonstration, got these kids in the jail, and then his organization didn't even have the resources to bail them out. I went in to tell Dr. King, we have a major issue on our hands, Martin, Doc, I said. Well, much to my surprise, he virtually dismissed me. He said, have you seen this? So I said, what is this? And he holds up a newspaper. And in that newspaper, there's a full-page ad signed by 8 prominent white clergymen from Birmingham. He was angry, he was hurt, but he was motivated like I'd never seen him motivated. He had an old newspaper, and all the blank spaces where there's not text or ads, he's written. And he's so frenetic about it that he's actually written on paper towels and toilet paper. He says, take these out and get these typed. Give it to Wyatt and see that Wyatt Walker, Dr. Wyatt T. Walker, is to get them typed. Now let me just say parenthetically here, Wyatt Walker must have been 30-something at the time. Very charismatic in my judgment, very handsome man.
I am Wyatt T. Walker, former Chief of Staff to Martin Luther King, and a author and cultural historian. Dr. King was prophetic. He said, if we can break Birmingham, we can break the South, and that's what happened.
So Martin gives me these scraps of paper. I put them in under my shirt, like here, open my shirt, and I put the scraps of paper down. So I took the scraps of paper out to Wyatt Walker.
We were in a room in the Gaston Motel. They brought these pieces of paper to me. I was the only one in Birmingham who could read Dr. King's chicken scratch writing as we describe it. And so it was my task to translate it. And my personal secretary, Willie Pearl Mackey King, had the responsibility of typing it as I translated.
She's alleged to have said, he may be a great speaker, but he can't write, because his handwriting was very difficult.
We worked late into the night and early morning, and she was exhausted. And I remember picking her up, moving her to a chair, and then I continued typing the last part of it. It took the better part of 2 evenings. The lawyers came by the motel, and I gave them what we had done.
I didn't pay any attention to the letter. okay? Didn't even think about it. It was not in my mind until I suddenly learned that I think the Quakers were going to publish the letter in one of their newsletters, and that the letter, using today's terminology, the letter went viral.
I think it is the most important document of the 20th century. Very much like the Gettysburg Address, and it became the raison d'etre of our movement.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling our present activities unwise and untimely.
You deplore the demonstrations that take place in Birmingham, but your statements, I am sorry to say, fail to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about demonstrations.
It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative.
When you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and you see tears welling up into her little eyes when she's told that Funtown is closed to colored people.
When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you, when you were humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white, men, and colored, when your first name becomes nigger and your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why it is difficult to wait.
All of that came from his heart. He wanted white America to see what they were doing. He wanted white America to see how hurtful it was.
The letter was a national call to the conscience of America, using the real life, real time reality of Birmingham as its template. Birmingham then became the spark that ignited the prairie fire of Negro resistance, which was transformed into Negro revolution.